Podcast napędza biuro tłumaczeń Duna. Przetłumacze. Podcast o tłumaczach, tłumaczeniach i językach. Dzień dobry, nazywam się Błażej Grygiel i zapraszam na kolejny podcast Przetłumacze. Tym razem naszym gościem jest profesor Andrew Byrd, który wraz ze swoją żoną brał udział w tworzeniu gry komputerowej Far Cry Primal. Oto trzeci z naszych anglojęzycznych wywiadów. Far Cry Primal to głośna i popularna produkcja. Zasłynęła m.in. tym, że jej bohaterowie mówili w języku stworzonym zupełnie od nowa. Rozgrywająca się w prehistorii opowieść o trzech plemionach pokazywała świat mówiący językiem, którym mogli porozumiewać się pierwsi mieszkańcy Europy, zaraz po epoce lodowcowej. Jak powstawał na potrzeby gry język proto-indoeuropejski? O tym rozmawiam z profesorem Byrdem. Zapraszam serdecznie do wysłuchania naszej rozmowy.
My name is Andrew Byrd. I'm an associate professor of linguistics at the University of Kentucky, and I'm an Indo-Europeanist, a phonologist, as well as I guess now I'm a conlanger, in that I worked on these languages for Far Cry Primal, and I've done other things as well, but the big project has been this Ubisoft game.
The first thing I'd like to ask you is about your academic work, because I've known about your name, I recognize your name because of the computer game, but as I know, this is not your main project. So what is the main theme of your current work, of course, considering linguistics?
Yeah, so in the past, I've considered myself to be primarily a historical phonologist. And what that means is that I study sound systems. So English has a system of sounds, right, that contains certain sounds that Polish doesn't have, and vice versa, right? I specifically study how those sounds are arranged into syllables. So Polish actually is one of my favorite languages in terms of what sorts of consonants are allowed to coexist side by side, and there are some amazing syllables in Polish. And my work essentially looks at modern languages like Polish to see how those segments are arranged within a syllable, within a word, and to kind of extrapolate from those modern languages, how would a language like Proto-Indo-European, which is the ancestor language of both Polish and English, how would Proto-Indo-European, which was spoken probably about 5,000 to 7,000 years ago, how would they have arranged their segments into a syllable? And what sort of evidence is there for that? So I wrote a book called The Indo-European Syllable. It was published, I guess, about 5 years ago. And that was right before we were contacted for Far Cry Primal.
So at first I would like to ask you about the book and the Proto-Indo-European language, because this is fascinating. A mother of all languages in Europe. What do we know about this language?
Well, there's some languages that aren't from Proto-Indo-European. And if I could just call it PIE for short.
Yes.
It's a lot easier to say. So there are some languages like Basque and Finnish that are not Hungarian, that are not Indo-European. And all that means is that these languages did not descend from this language, Proto-Indo-European. But of course, this is all reconstruction, right? We have no evidence of Proto-Indo-European of PIE. But most scholars today believe that PIE was spoken probably in the vicinity between like Ukraine and Kazakhstan. So across those steppes, they were some of the first people to ride horses. Probably not the people to invent horseback riding, but some of the first to actually use it. And so one of the reasons it was so successful is that they were able to spread over large distances of land, which allowed them to settle different places.
That's fascinating. So the strength of Proto-Indo-European was in the legs of the horses.
That's one of the theories. Of course, it's all theoretical, right? I mean, historically, the narrative has been that they spread through warfare and things like that, but it's not exactly clear that that's the case. Now, this is not my specialty, right? I'm not an archaeologist or a cultural reconstructionist, but yeah, one of the big theories is that the reason that they were able to successfully spread was because of the horse.
So you look into the languages we speak today, and you look for the roots to show you the way to those ancient ones?
So that's part of it, but so part of it is to see like say the word for water, right? The word for water, we believe, I mean, there are different ways to pronounce it depending on where it's used within the word. It's like Polish, right? So they had case. Mm-hmm. But the base case, the nominative accusative case for the word for water was water. And we know that because if you can look at the words within English and also within Slavic, right? So I don't know what it is in Polish, but in Russian, I believe it's voda or voda.
In Polish, it's quite similar. It is voda.
Yeah. So, so that word in Polish derives from something very similar to what water in English derives from. And by looking at these similarities, we can figure out that that the word was water within pi. And you might be wondering, how do we know if it was a W or a V, right? So in Slavic, it's a V. In English, it's a W. Well, we know by looking at all of the languages around the world that it's very common for W's to become V. So I don't know if you know some German, but the word for water in German is Wasser, and it's written with a W. And that's because it used to be pronounced with the W. It's just like in Slavic, the W at the beginnings of syllables became a V.
That's really fascinating.
So part of it is looking at these traces within languages. But what my scholarship really focuses on is building upon that by looking at what do modern languages do? How do they treat their sounds, right? Because there are certain patterns that you can detect in languages. Sometimes those patterns derive from its history, but sometimes it's just in how human beings are constructed. And you can kind of take those patterns, you could take those principles and apply it to this prehistoric language that was never written down and infer that, okay, well, if 99.9% of the world's languages behave this way, then there's very good reason to believe that Pi also behave that way, except if there's really good evidence to say that they did.
That's really like detectives work. I can see.
Absolutely. It's like a combination of detective work, algebra, and reading old text. Yeah, absolutely.
But suddenly you are contacted by somebody who doesn't look very much into the past, rather looks into the future because of the market. You were contacted by Ubisoft and they told you, okay, you have to create a language for us, a Proto-Indo-European language that would suit our computer game, Far Cry Primal, which is a first-person perspective shooter set in the let's say primal times. I don't know, just after Ice Age, I presume.
That's right.
So this seems like a very difficult and a very odd task for an academic professor.
It is. I mean, I think they really lucked out in who they asked, because I'm a huge gamer. That is one of my big passions in life is playing video games. I love it. I have since I had a PC when I was 5 years old, and I was playing old Sierra computer games. So yeah, they contacted me, and at first we thought it was a hoax because you get some weird stuff when you're a professor, get some strange emails, and I wanted to make sure that it wasn't a hoax. So I Googled the name of the person who emailed me, and sure enough, that person, Jan Sharon is his name, in Montreal, works at Ubisoft. And then I was intrigued, right? It was actually great timing because, like I had mentioned, I just finished writing my book. I had submitted it. So I didn't have any big projects to work on. And yeah, so they talked to me about this. And one of the first things I said was, well, 12,000 years ago, that's much further back than Proto-Indo-European. And they were like, yes, that is true. But as with lots of history, we have to approximate, right? So it's much better to to get Proto-Indo-European in the game than, say, modern English. And that's something that they actually found in very early testing, is that the players, so the players of the alpha versions of Primal, didn't believe the game when it was done in English. It just felt weird. Why are they speaking English? This doesn't make sense. They don't feel caveman enough for me. So what we did, so it wasn't just me, it was also Brenna, so my wife. So she's a soon-to-be associate professor of German at UK. And then 3 of our old friends from graduate school, so Chiara Bozzoni and Ryan Sandell and Jessica DeLisi, we sat down and we thought, okay, if they want pi, why don't we make an earlier version of pi? So let's just call it proto-pi, proto-Indo-European. And so we figured out certain rules that were likely to have taken place in the early prehistory of Proto-Indo-European. And so that's what we gave them. We gave them an even earlier version of pi.
But it's not the only thing you gave them, because you gave them and us, because I'm also a fan of this game and a player, you gave us 3 languages, because there are 3 tribes there. Each of them speaks their own way. Each of them speaks their own language, and none of them is English.
That's right. Udam and Winja are basically the same. Like, there are certain inflectional patterns that we gave to them. So if you listen to how Udam talk, what we call the prosody, so their pitch and the rhythms are slightly different from Wenja. And there's certain words that we decided to use in Wenja versus Udam. So in Udam, there was no word to protect defensively, right? So they didn't understand that you wouldn't go and attack someone who might attack you. So they just had, I forgot the word, but in Winja, they actually had a distinction between you offensively attack someone in your defense and you defensively attack someone back, if that makes sense. So there are little subtle differences there, but for the most part, they're the same language. You are right about Izila or Hisilach. So that language was different, and it was very close to what we reconstruct pi to be.
So it was like an advanced version of the language the 2 first tribes spoke.
That's right. And that's what, the creative team at Ubisoft, they like that idea, because the Izila, the Hisilach, so the creative team liked that. They liked the idea that there was a more advanced language within their speech.
And does your adventure with these languages end with producing the video game, or are there, I don't know, conventions or meetings when people ask you to teach them some of the Wenja language?
Yeah, so, since the game was published, so that would have been February, March 2016, we have given talks about the creation of the languages of the game. We've maintained a website, which I'm awful about keeping blogs up and things like that, but I tried to put quite a bit of stuff on there about the grammar and the sound system, and kind of annotated scripts, right? So you look at the English translations alongside the actual words. That has not been something we've been focusing on, because right now Brenna and I actually have, for the last 2 or so years, have been trying to produce a new video game, one that is not Ubisoft, one that actually is kind of an educational video game that teaches about Proto-Indo-European, its culture, its mythology, the language, for kids around 10 to 13 years old. And we've secured some funding. So there's a government agency here in the United States called the NEH, so the National Endowment of the Humanities. So we got a small grant from them, and we've applied for multiple grants and waiting to hear back from quite a few to see, if we can get additional funding to make this game. Correct. So you asked earlier, like, what do I normally do, since, normally I wouldn't make a video game. Actually, right now, I am, like, that's what I'm doing, is just figuring out how do you design a game, it's exciting for me. It's very weird, right? Because I wasn't trained to be a game designer. But we've partnered up with a local game designer, developer that is, named Supersoul. They're helping us design this thing. And that's kind of what I do now, is try to make this a reality. Because what I see is this really interesting story, right? That everybody that I talk to thinks is fascinating, right? The idea that Polish and English were once the same language, that's wild. How on earth could that be, right? That story is interesting to everyone. But the thing that all scholars of Indo-European, not just in the United States, but in Europe too, or around the world, we don't really try to tell that story to people outside of our very small groups of people, right? Classicists, so people who study Latin and Greek, have to discover Indo-European on their own. When they discover, I don't know which languages you've studied besides English, but if you studied Latin, you discover first day in class, the word for I, that is the first person singular pronoun, is ego. And then you go study ancient Greek, and it's also ego. And you go, why on earth is that the case? That's very strange. And the answer, of course, is pi. But we as scholars, we're not actively introducing people to this field. So I'm sorry, my 7-year-old just came in to talk.
No problem.
So we're not actively trying to tell people this story. And I think that's doing a huge disservice to the world, but also a huge disservice to our field, because as a field, we're getting smaller. We're losing professorships. There are fewer people who are going to study it. And we're not viewed as relevant as we were in the initial stages of the field. So that's kind of been what I've been doing, is trying to figure out how do we make this more relevant in the world.
That's a great idea, using a medium like a video game, to promote such an academic knowledge. I think it could gain you lots of new students.
I hope so.
And after this experience with Ubisoft, and after this project you're working on, are you planning, or have you ever thought about creating new languages, or was it just this adventure and you rather work on existing languages?
Not really. I mean, so there have been companies who have contacted me to ask for me to create translations of certain things. The biggest job outside of Ubisoft I had was for National Geographic. They made this show where they wanted me to reconstruct certain proto-languages for scenes that they had. So dialogue scenes where, a group of people were speaking to each other in Proto-Afro-Asiatic or Proto-Nostratic, which is supposedly, this language that was spoken about 20,000 years ago. I've done small things like that, but I've never actually sat down and been like, okay, going to make a new language, because for me, it's time, right? And I personally, I know this is going to sound like conlang or heresy, but I don't really get the attraction of making up a new language that no one else will use, if that makes sense. Now, if I could make a community where everybody is speaking in this new language that I have, that'd be great. Like with Wenja, right? So we have a handful of really ardent supporters who, for a while there, were very engaged with Wenja, and we engaged with them. But no, I haven't yet done that. I do teach a course at my university called How to Create Your Own Language, and my son, my 7-year-old, and I are actually going to make up a language for that to kind of show the students how to do that, right? A Dimetrodon dinosaur language. But normally, no, I don't make up.
That also sounds really nice. Tell me, because you created a complete language, as I've noticed from the game, that you can really communicate with it. And I suppose you didn't have a lot of time to teach the voice actors of the developers the language. How did you do it? Teach them to produce the exact sounds you wanted to hear?
Yeah, so that was a big challenge, and that was probably the thing that Ubisoft was most worried about, right? You've got these actors, all of whom speak English. I'd say about 2/3 of which spoke French, and you've got them embodying these characters who are supposed to be from 12,000 years ago. They had to learn how to move differently, right? So they had motion coaches. The guy who, I forget his name, Terry something. The guy who worked on the Planet of the Apes movies to kind of teach the actors how to move like apes and things like that. He actually worked on this game too. So it was a big challenge. And the thing that Brenna, I wish she could talk about this, but Brenna, one of her main roles as a professor is actually what's called language pedagogy. And that is, she teaches other students how to teach. And she realized that the best way to get the actors comfortable in this situation, because they were scared, right? They were pretty petrified about it, was to actually conduct lessons within Wenja. So she had them, doing basic functions like stand up, sit down, throw a spear, things like that. And she tried to integrate dialogue that a lot of the actors had within their scenes within the lessons. It was funny, we did this about 3 or 4 times. They became much, much more comfortable. And we found that the actors actually, they were speaking to each other on set, within Wenja. They even found an error within the language. They're like, I'm not sure that's the right grammar. I'm like, okay, that's embarrassing. And, I fixed that. But that was the primary way that we got them comfortable. And I'm not sure it would have been as successful without those lessons.
Really amazing job. And the effect lives until today, 4 years after the premiere of the game. And I hope personally that there will be other games in such settings, and they will contact you.
Oh yeah, of course. And of course I couldn't tell you if they did, because the whole non-disclosure agreements, the NDA. But that all said, I would be surprised if they do another. Which is a shame. I think a Far Cry Primal 2, like imagine massive cavemen battles, right? Imagine like a PvP situation, right? With the same basic setup. Now they might have to get rid of the pets. That might make things a little too crazy. But I think they could do a lot there. And of course, I don't know if you played all the way to the end of the game, but there's a little video at the end.
Yes, I did.
Did you play?
Yes, I did. Yes, there is this post-credit scene which tells us there can be more about it. So
I know. So it would make me so happy for them to do that. But I really think the big hurdle is that you have a certain segment of the gaming population that sees first-person shooter as synonymous with guns. And if you take away the guns, then there's no point. I mean, me personally, so I've played Far Cry 3, 4, 5, Primal, obviously, the New Dawn game, and I always end up just using my bow. Like that's all I do is bow and stealth. So I think it's a great game, and I think I got really good reception from the fans. But
the thing I liked most about the game was taming animals. This was my favorite part.
Which was your favorite animal?
I couldn't say, but all these opportunities to ride on a mammoth or ride on a bear is like
saber-tooth.
Yeah. It's like amazing for
cool.
me.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
And the idea of an ecosystem where even animals hunt each other. This is something that wasn't done before. It was a player.
It wasn't.
I think it wasn't done in such a way. It was usually the player versus the nature, and here it was nature versus nature.
Yeah, and like I think the best part of the game actually is the first 5-10 hours where you're weak, where you really haven't invested much in the talent tree, and especially if you're playing on expert mode, going out into the wilderness at night is terrifying.
Oh yes,
because the animals are so strong. It's great.
Thank you very much for this. I hope we can hear each other again one day.
Okay, thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.